Greetings from the Rutgers Athletic Center, where the Rutgers men's basketball team suffered its first loss of the season, and 84-65 dropped to St. John's. St. John's shot the lights out of the ball. They tied a program record, I believe, in three-pointers with 16. They shot 50% exactly, 16 for 32. And Rutgers, after such a hot start from three during the season, went cold. They went 7 for 26. I think that was really the story of the game. Both teams, St. John's shooting the lights out, Rutgers struggling and never really being able to keep up. What do you take away from this loss?
I think it was like what we saw in the first half, both teams adjusting. I think early, like the game started off really excited. I think players got too excited, especially with a young team, with the crowd, the first real big game of their careers. Everyone's excited, and I think St. John's got caught into playing a little bit too much one-on-one, and then they checked themselves after that first timeout, and then they started to move the ball, got the ball to their shoes in transition. And I think after a while, the game was close, but then eventually they started to find those open shots that they were missing in first half, and they capitalized on it, especially their wings with Haram and Figueroa.
Yeah, I thought Haram and Figueroa were outstanding. They played, I expected them to play really well because I've seen a lot of good things about them, but they played lights out. They were incredible. I think on either side, things just kind of snowballed. For Rutgers, you're a team that comes in shooting hot, like I said, and then you start a little slow, maybe feel a little bit of sense of urgency that you got to hit one of these, you got to start getting back in rhythm, and they just started forcing things, whereas St. John's was just nailing one after the other, and they just kept pushing that momentum and getting hot. I thought Rutgers forced things a little bit at times. Eugene in the post sometimes forced some shots. I think Issa and a couple other guys forced some threes that weren't there. And then I think, again, it snowballed. They didn't shoot well from the free throw line. And I think Rutgers was lucky to be down, I think it was 4 or 5. No, it was 11 at the half. It was something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
It was 11 at the half, and I thought they were lucky to be down only 11. They could have been losing by 20 or 30 the way that St. John's was shooting and the way that Rutgers was not shooting. You asked Michael about this. I thought it was an interesting point. St. John's made it an issue to always switch the ball to having one of their guards being guarded by either Miles Johnson or Shaq Dorson. How did you think they handled that?
I definitely had an effect because obviously with Haram, Pons, especially Simon and Figueroa, they're guards and wings that can take it off the dribble, especially. And I felt like they were looking for the matchup with the big, especially their wings with Haram and Figueroa. They were able to they saw the big come there and they thought either I could pull a jump shot right in front of them. They're sagging too much low because the bigs were afraid that they would get beat to the paint, so they sagged off a little bit. And that little bit of penetration that Pons gets off the initial drive got their shoes open.
Yeah, I think there's some level of concern here just in terms of this is the first big opponent Rutgers played all season.
Mm-hmm.
The reaction was obviously not what they wanted. I think that at some point you got to look at the way St. John's shot the ball and say that there wasn't really much Rutgers can do to stop that. That was just, they were just on fire. Of course, the perimeter defense could be better. Michael wanted to always shift questions towards defense as his MO. Defense is his number one thing, and he's clearly disappointed with how they played. But I don't think there should be any alarm about the way they defended the three. I don't think every team they play is going to shoot the way that St. John's shot.
If anything, it's probably inexperience because I saw a lot of times where Harper, especially when put on Haron or even Mathis or Issa, for example, they could have closed out. They could have been on the Haron or LJ just a little bit more, but as soon as they got the ball, they looked over and then they shot the ball. That can't happen, especially when you have shooters such as that. And it was something I know the coaching staff emphasized in the scouting report as well. That little room shooters get, they can pull it from deep, and that initially gets the rhythm.
And I do think, to their defense, I think that if you close out really hard on those guys, they're good enough off the dribble
exactly.
to come and penetrate the paint.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
It's really hard to guard a team as talented as that. St. John's is not a top 25 team in the rankings right now, but I do think they have top 25 talent. The question is always with the coaching, and I think, at least for tonight, I mean, the coaching didn't have to do much. They just told them to shoot. But I think that this team has enough talent to contend to win the Big East, make the tournament. I think it's a really good team, and it was a really good test early in the season for Rutgers to know where they're at. It's a good barometer. Rutgers next week has a bit of an easier slate. They take on Eastern Michigan at home at 7 on Tuesday, and then on Black Friday they take on Boston University at 2 p.m. I guess where do they go from here? How does Rutgers bounce back, and do you see any reason for long-term concern coming off of this loss?
I don't see any long-term concern because with a young team, there's only one way you could go, and I think it's up, especially The only way you could go down is I don't think if there's the right culture set, and the culture is set with this coaching staff. And like Gio even said, he didn't play point guard last year. He's adjusting just like everyone else. Eugene's adjusting to being the leader on the team. Same thing with Shaq. Same thing with Issa being more aggressive, and with the freshmen as well. So it's just an adjustment period. So this is the first real big game.
I do think you're right that the one place Rutgers can go is up. They should obviously attempt to not suffer losses as big as this in the future. I think, as you said, the season, the rest of the season is about growth. If you go to Scarlet Nation in the preseason, most of us discussed 12 to 14 wins being the ceiling for this team. I stand by that, and I think that today really showed that. As good as Rutgers was last weekend, they're going to have nights like this where they struggle. They're a young team. They're still learning on both ends of the floor.
Exactly. Especially defensively as well.
Yes, and I think that's something that Pico is going to emphasize a lot in the coming weeks and the rest of the season. I've said this in the preseason. I think today emphasized it. Rutgers is a year away from contending for any postseason tournament, be that the NIT or the much coveted NCAA. I think you had a guy in the building today, Paul Mulcahy. He's going to sign for Rutgers on Monday. He's going to be a big piece to this team that comes in a year to play point guard and add some versatility to the lineup. Until then, Rutgers has about 27 more games this season to kind of develop as a team. And my advice to the fan base is just enjoy the ride for what it is, a year of growth. Enjoy watching the guys, Ron Harper, Montez Mathis, Caleb McConnell, Miles Johnson, take steps forward every week. I thought Montez took a step forward today. He looked more aggressive getting into the basket, looked a little bit better on the defensive end. So I think those are the things you look for. And enjoy any good wins they get. Don't fret too much about nights like tonight. And I think, as you said in the beginning here, the only real place to go is up. There's a lot of room to grow for this team, and I think fans should, as I said before, take advantage of the season for what it is and enjoy the process, enjoy the growth. We'll see you guys again on Tuesday for Eastern Michigan, 7 p.m. here at the Rack. Until then, I'm Brian Fonseca, this is Cheikh N'Diaye, signing off for Scarlet Nation.